and we certainly appreciate him doing so. And so, given it this year, Black Voters Matter. Take it away.
We come this far by faith, and we are leaning on the Lord, and we are trusting in His holy word, 'cause He's never failed me yet. Oh, can't turn around. We've come this far by faith. Amen.
My name is April Albright.
And I'm Cliff Albright. And you just heard from our sister comrade, LaTosha Brown, who could not be here tonight, but she will be joining us virtually a little bit later on. And together, we are the co-founders of Black Voters Matter, which this fall celebrates 10 years of building power all across this country, all across our nation. And by that, I mean our Black nation, within the nation, all across this union, our union. And that's what tonight is about, right? It's about, and that's what our remarks are going to be about. It's about the state of our union. And so a few blocks away, there might be something else going on. A few blocks away, there might be some other dude, some tiny, tiny little man, some little wannabe dictator, accused pedophile, actually not just accused, but convicted of 34 counts. There may be somebody else, someplace else, down the street, telling a whole bunch of lies. But that's not what this is about. Tonight, this right here, this space, our fam over there, Roland and the crew, some good food, some good libations. Tonight in this space,
That's right.
This is about, as the back of our shirt says, it's all about us. It's about the state of our union.
And so before we really unpack the state of our union, I want to talk a little bit about Black Voters Matter, because yes, 10 years ago, we did incorporate. But before that, Black Voters Matter was actually forged in Selma, Alabama. It started when the three of us, living in Selma, at a time where the same mayor who was the mayor when Dr. King and others were organizing to get access to the ballot in Selma and other places was mayor then. The same racist mayor who called Dr. King Dr. Coon was still in office when the three of us were living and working and organizing in Selma. But a little known secret, we really weren't into voting. In fact, Cliff and I thought in many ways that voting was basically sending Black folks into a burning house. But when we came to Selma and saw that the same white racist mayor was still in office, we determined in that moment that we were going to get him out of office. And so we created, alongside people like Fire Rose, Teray, Tarana Burke, Cliff, LaTosha, and I forged a campaign called Joe Gotta Go. And we ran a campaign, and yes, we won. But I remember leaving the absentee ballot box that night because we had won overwhelmingly at the ballot box. Black folks had come out. And I remember the images of Black folks singing and dancing in the street because we had won. And in that moment, we determined that we wanted to spend the rest of our adult life making sure that we could use elections in order to rid this country of this demonic white supremacist force. So that is the spirit behind Black Voters Matter and why we do what we do, why we organize in all of these states, and why it's important in this moment to talk about the state of our union. Because what Selma taught us is that the state of our union, our Black nation, is strong.
That's right.
Because what we do know is our oppressor, it's his or her behavior, their tactics, their strategy does not determine our identity, our power, our love, our tactics, and ultimately our future. So when you think about it like that, the state of our union is strong. But it still means that we must be sober-minded and very clear about what our enemy is doing. So while we certainly, right, are strong, we're going to talk a little bit about what our oppressor is so that we understand what our goals are and how we still move forward in power even in this moment. Because make no mistake about it, we know this person in the White House. Our people have seen this type of fascism before, right?
That's right. That's right. And we don't have to look to Germany. We don't have to look to another country to know what fascism looks like. We've been knowing what fascism looks like in this country. And so what we want to do is, we want to give just an overview of some of the things. We can't even go into all of the things this regime, I don't call it administration,
No.
I call it regime. We can't even go into all the things that this regime has done. But we're going to give an overview and try to hit some of the main points. And more importantly, you make it very clear how it's rooted in anti-blackness and how it's actually affecting our community. Because you got some folks that say, well, yeah, I know he's doing all this stuff, but I'm not really seeing how it affects us, how it affects me, right? And so we want to talk about it. One of the first things that he did when he came in was that he started passing all these executive orders. And it's hard to believe that, a year ago at this time, many of us, like, our heads were spinning because there was so much going on. It was like drinking water out of a fire hydrant. It was just, just every day, executive order after executive order after executive order. One of those early executive orders that he did was around getting rid of DEI. All right, y'all remember this? Everything became DEI, right? There's a plane crash in D.C. and they call it DEI, right? If anything went wrong anywhere, it would be called DEI. No matter how many white folks were involved in whatever the thing was, everything became DEI. But what they did was, one of the things that they did was that they got rid of so-called DEI within federal policy. That included within hiring, that included positions. You had a lot of folks that had been in these DEI, these equity positions, who all of a sudden lost their jobs, right? But more than that, contracts, like some of the very things that became an avenue for some black businesses, all of a sudden that was wiped out. And so from very early on, they made it very clear that they were going to get rid of, as Roland always talks about, he talks about that this regime has been a war on black folks. One of the very first things they did was to do that in regards to federal policy, federal hiring, federal contracts regarding so-called DEI.
But he didn't stop there, right? The goal wasn't just to erase opportunities for black folk in the federal government. He wanted to make sure that also trickled out into the public, forum and sector. And he did so by starting with our school systems, right? He decided that he was going to direct college and universities, right, to end all of their DEI programs. On the back of what the Supreme Court had done earlier, which was remove affirmative action, he decided that he was going to direct and use the power of the Department of Education to do so. And so he told universities and colleges that if you have diversity and equity and inclusion programs at your school, you're going to lose federal funding. And he did so immediately. And schools, unfortunately, complied. They bent the knee. And so many of those schools, the record shows over 400 immediately began to either abolish, right, alter, or take away completely programs that supported things like black student unions, like courses that focused on black studies. Those were the types of things that fell under diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so he did so, like, with a razor-sharp precision at universities. And at least 27 schools in the South completely abolished those types of programs that focused on black folks. So we wonder sometimes, are these policies directed and geared to black folks? Be certain that they are. But he didn't even stop there, right? Because we know that what he also wanted to do in the public forum was remove evidence that we even existed. And so he began to challenge things like our exhibits in our museums, the Smithsonian, talking about slavery didn't exist, and that talking about slavery was anti-quote-unquote American. And so we saw even recently, as 2 or 3 weeks ago, in Pennsylvania, he actually removed an entire exhibit on slavery. And so, yes, when he says DEI, we know what he's talking about. We know he's talking about the black nation, our history and our power, and he's determined in every public forum that there's jurisdiction of the federal system to make sure that our voices and our history are not told.
And there's some people that say, well, I see what's going on with, yeah, he disrespects us. He's trying to eliminate our history. He's trying to eliminate our humanity. But at the end of the day, all I really care about is what? I care about the money. I care about the economy. I care about jobs. That's what we heard some folks say, even as we were mobilizing voters last year, right? Not a whole lot of them, but some of them were out there, right? And so what do we have now after this first year? What is the state of our union economically after a year of this Trump regime? Well, what we know is that black unemployment has skyrocketed.
Yes.
It's gone from a situation where under President Biden, we had reached a historic low in black unemployment, to now we're looking at rapidly increasing unemployment. 7.2 estimates right now are between 7.2, 8.3%. And as always, twice as much as white unemployment, right? And so he's done nothing for us. All he has done is hurt our economy. But in addition to that, it's been particularly focused on black women. We know that there are estimates that around 300,000 black women lost jobs under this regime. But it's our entire community that's feeling the job losses. But this is happening in a time of what? In a time of inflation. Y'all remember that story, right? Oh, inflation's out of control under the previous president, right? He's going to come in and fix it. He's come in and he's made it worse. He's come in with stupid policies, ignorant tariffs, which were just proven even by a corrupt Supreme Court who said that his tariffs were unconstitutional and that he had gone too far. But meanwhile, this comes a year too late, because we've already seen the impact of these tariffs in terms of rising prices. So again, if you're somebody out there who's saying, well, I don't really see how what he's doing is connected. Oh, but by the way, everything is a lot more expensive. The housing is unaffordable. Then this is a result of policy. So what the policies are is not just that they're anti-black, they are, but it's because they're anti-black and they actually are impacting our lives. White supremacy is like a violent crime against our lives.
And it doesn't stop there, right? Because historically in this country, what they have known is that our political power is important.
That's right.
Political power is important so that we can change the dynamics of our community, respond to the oppression, and build. And so what do we know? What do they usually do is they go after our ability to vote. And so we've seen under this administration or this regime, as Cliff has said repeatedly, an effort to stifle that, to take that away. And we know that the Supreme Court of this country had already started with that, right? We knew that as early as 2013, under the Shelby v. Holder decision, the Voting Rights Act, which is some major legislation that has at least allowed for black folk in this country to have access to the ballot, to increase political representation, to have some means to bring resources into our community. Well, we saw in 2013, the Supreme Court saying, hey, Section 5 and Section 4, that preclearance power, that's gone away. And since that time, year after year, we have seen SCOTUS, right, the Supreme Court, attack other important provisions of that act, like Section 2, right? Weaponizing, allowing states to weaponize the administration of elections. And so this administration, this regime, when it came in power, it joined the effort and creating an executive order that basically now said, you have to prove that you are a citizen, show your papers, right, in order to vote. And so here we had a situation very similar to the Jim Crow poll tax time, where you had to go through hoops in order to vote. And so this executive order, right, that they created in 2025 during the first year was designed to do the very same thing. And now this Do Nothing Congress has joined them. So you got this trifecta, right? You got this Do Nothing Congress creating the SAVE Act to try to make citizenship become a burden to millions and millions of voting, even though they know that less than 1%, right? There's not even really strong evidence that it is happening. And we also have this SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, who is even deciding, as we are talking right now, right? Waiting on a decision to determine whether or not the Voting Rights Act itself, in the Calais, Louisiana case, is going to be unconstitutional itself, right? And then we have SCOTUS trying to use executive order to attack voting so that our political power is dampened. So those are the things that are happening under this administration right now.
Right, and so we're looking at the economy, we're looking at the economic impact, we're looking at the voting impact and the impacts on our power and our voice, and we're looking at the fact that in the midst of all this, our communities are getting sicker and sicker.
That's right.
In the midst of all this, what do we see? We see attacks on healthcare. We see attacks on Obamacare. We see attacks on Medicaid. We see billions of dollars being given away in the form of tax cuts to billionaires. Also, all while in the process of cutting what? Of cutting support for healthcare, supporting healthcare premiums, SNAP. And so what we're seeing is that our community is losing the ability to be healthy.
That's right.
This impacts the Black community more than, or disproportionately than any other community, right? And so in the midst of that, we also have what? And Roland and the crew were talking about this just a few minutes ago. As we're losing the access to the health care, we're also facing more and more health threats. Why? Because you got a person that's got worms in his brain as the Secretary of what is it, Health and Human Services, who's going around telling people you don't need vaccinations.
Right.
And so lo and behold, what winds up happening? Right now, as we speak, we are looking at measles outbreaks all across the country, but in particular in the state of South Carolina. But as we were just talking about earlier, we've gone from a situation where maybe in a normal year you may have had 200 cases of measles. Now we saw last year over 2,200 cases. This year, close to 1,000 cases, and we're only in February. And so we're facing more health risk at the time that they're cutting their support for health care, cutting premiums, cutting access to medicine and the like. They want us broke, jobless, sick, and without a voting voice. And then lastly, and again, we're only scratching the surface of everything that this white Christian nationalist regime has been doing. But I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
The attacks on our communities, the attacks on cities from a combination of National Guard being sent to our cities, and then ICE agents or brown shirts or Gestapo or whatever you want to call them, but a well-funded, basically almost like a military force rolling through our communities, weapons brandished, knocking down doors, breaking into houses, breaking into cars. This is what's happening in our communities. We've seen it right now. We've seen the worst of it in places like California, like Chicago, like DC, like Memphis, right? We've seen the worst of it, but that's not the only places where it's happening. It's happening all across this country. And we need to be clear that this is not somebody else's problem.
It's not,
right? This is happening to our communities. If you're not clear about that, all you need to do is to look at the images of Black Hawk helicopters coming and people propelling down an apartment building in Chicago and pulling out Black folks, all for a raid that supposedly was going after criminal, undocumented immigrants, only so what they could find what? Nothing. No criminals, no arrest, because it was all a farce. Right. But it's a farce that affects us in our communities, right? It's a farce that has led to people being murdered in the streets of Minnesota, murdered in the streets of California, leading to a car accident, Sister Linda, who was murdered or killed in Savannah, Georgia, because of the reckless behavior of ICE agents. This is not somebody else's problem. Even if we put aside the fact that when you look at the Black community, and I think I heard somebody mention this earlier, a significant portion of Black folks in this country are immigrants, right? 10% estimates, right? And so when you look at who's being impacted by this, this is not somebody else's problem. And that ought to be enough, right? Just the principle of the thing ought to be enough, because as we know, and as Dr. King used to tell us, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
That's right.
So it ought to be enough that it's just wrong. But even if nothing else than self-preservation, we cannot stand by and allow this rogue criminal agency to just go out and continue to harass people. If for no other reason, it ought to be reminiscent to us of the slave catchers that used to go around trying to round up people in the same way that they weren't being beholden to something legal, the same way that they might scoop up anybody, even if you had your papers. That's the way that this force is operating. And any of us can be subject to it at any time. It's not somebody else's problem. it's our problem. And then lastly, it would be bad enough if all these issues that we're talking about were limited just to the borders of this country.
But
what are we seeing? We are seeing the same rogueness going out and bombing ships off the coast of Venezuela.
Well,
and be clear, what countries, it doesn't just impact Venezuela, which would be bad enough on its own, but it's also impacting all of those countries, all of those islands, right, that are in the same area. Who lives at those islands, right? These are black folks who we are connected to. Just because the ship that came from Africa happened to land on some shore before it got here doesn't mean that we are not all connected.
We are all
the same way that we are connected, that the same forces that we are seeing happen domestically, we're seeing happen in Gaza, right? Because be clear, even though you may be hearing about and reading about a ceasefire, that there are still bombings and still shootings and still murder happening in the land of Gaza. And now it's even being brought to, we are on the verge of what? On the verge of war with Iran, right? And so again, all of this would be bad enough because it's unjust, it's immoral. But even if you just want to think about it from a selfish perspective, right? A self-preservation perspective, all of that costs money. And all of that money that is going into these wars, that is going into these atrocities, someplace else, means one less dollar that's going to our kids at their schools. Because Lord knows they can't even get the food for the food programs now. It's one less dollar that's going to our health care. It's one less dollar that's going to the infrastructure in our communities. And so even if we're not motivated by the fact that we are an international people.
That's right.
Right? We just lost, just as a tangent if I may, we just lost Brother Jesse, Reverend Jesse Jackson. And also a few days ago, just a couple of days, February 21st, we commemorated the loss of our black shining prince, Brother Malcolm. Now here you have two people that some people might look at as being maybe even on opposite sides of a spectrum. But they were both very clear that we have a role in this world, that we are connected to the continent and to the entire diaspora. I remember Brother Jesse going across the waters to bring back a hostage when the strongest country in the world couldn't get its own hostage back. And so we have always been an international people. Du Bois, right? Delaney. That is our history. That is our legacy. And so now is not the time for us to betray that legacy. The state of our union includes the state of our union within these borders, but also the state of our union within the global community, within the African diaspora.
Amen. All of these things, are possible because of international and historical dynamics, right? Like, when we talk about our movement.
So that's the exciting thing. So we just went through all of these things talking about what's wrong, right? What they've been doing over the past year. But we've also got to be clear that this is a moment of opportunity.
That's right.
We have often seen throughout our history that when we have had the periods of our greatest advancement, it's because of some larger turmoil, some larger struggle, some larger dynamic. Emancipation, the Civil War comes about in part, yes, because of the years of abolition and resistance, but also because of the realities of a regional struggle between the North and the South, the struggle over the economy, over industry versus agriculture, right? And so in that moment, that combined with our efforts, we're able to make a leap, right? Then we fast forward to the Civil Rights Movement, and what do we see? We see all of our organizing that we have been doing for decades, right? We see all the legal strategies, the organizing strategies, the boycotts. We see all of that, but we also see that all of this is happening within a global context of a Cold War. At a moment when the U.S. cannot, on the one hand, be claiming to be the face of democracy, while on the other hand, it is still oppressing a significant portion of its population. So that moment creates an opportunity, it creates a crack that we're able to take advantage of, right? Heck, how did we even get a black president, right? It happens because this country was in the midst of a financial chaos, right?
That's right.
And so that's when folks get desperate and say, well, maybe we'll give the black man a chance, right? And so we always see that there's moments of opportunity that when our work and our efforts coincide with some moments of opportunities, that we're able to make a leap and make an advancement. And that's the kind of moment that I feel that we are in right now. That there's a lot of bad that's been going on, but there's also a lot of pushback and there's a lot of resistance. And we believe that right now that we can get some things done.
That's right.
And so how does that happen, right? How do you resist a slide into dictatorship, a slide into fascism, a slide into authoritarianism? Well, there's a lot of research that's been done, some of it from other countries, that says that there's certain strategies that you have to follow. And I'm gonna just talk for a second about something that we refer to as the 4 Ds. That when you're going through a slide like this, that you gotta have a few different strategies that you can categorize under 4 Ds. 1, disruption, right? And I'm gonna repeat that, disruption. There is no path out of a slide to dictatorship and fascism that does not have to be responded to with some type of disruption. That means protest. That means getting in the machinery and messing up the ways that things are usually done, right? It means not obeying in advance. But all efforts, or all successful efforts to push through a slide into authoritarianism involve some level of disruption. What are the other Ds? Defection, right? Some of the work has to be not just about disrupting, but how do you get people that are supportive to try to defect, right? To try to switch sides. Now, I'm not one to go and try to organize MAGA. Right, that ain't happening.
We're not doing that.
Right, we're not doing that, right? And I'm really not going to try to organize Black MAGA either,
We're not doing that.
We're not doing that.
We're not doing that.
But what we can do strategically is try to take opportunities where they have wedges, where they have disagreements. Maybe it's a disagreement about Epstein. Get up in that wedge. Maybe it's a disagreement over what we were just talking about, spending money like they sold America first. So, why are you spending money over here? Get up in that wedge. And so part of defection means that you take any crack, any light that you, look, they have used divide and conquer against us since we were brought over here.
Right.
And so I think that it can be used in the reverse. It doesn't have to use up a whole lot of our time, but if you can strategically do the things that we need to do to build while also taking advantage of their wedges, that's got to be a part of the process. So the second D is defection. The third D is delegitimization. Right? And that means any types of organizing or any types of efforts that delegitimizes the authoritarian, right? Delegitimizes the fascist, delegitimizes the wannabe dictator. And there are lots of different ways that you can delegitimize them. You can show, you can do things that show that their policies are illegal. That delegitimizes them, right? You can even do it with humor. South Park, every time they do a cartoon and they show the wannabe dictator in a certain kind of way with small body parts, right? That's delegitimizing. Anything that we do that makes them small,
that's right,
is a part of the process, right? And so we've got to be able to do that. And then the fourth D is this, and this is critical, and we're going to talk more about this later on. The fourth D is critical. It's develop, as in we've got to develop other models. Because at the end of the day, you can't just fight against the authoritarianism. We can't just make the U-turn, because we're not trying to go back to what it was before the slide. We trying to go to someplace different. We trying to go to someplace better. We trying to go to a new vision.
That's right.
To do that, we've got to develop what that vision means.
That's right.
What's a part of that vision? What are the models and the new structures that we need in order to make that vision a reality? And so these are the 4 Ds that we talk about when we talk about resisting authoritarianism and fighting. And I'm gonna add a 5th one.
Okay.
And this is Cliff's amendment, right? I believe you have to add defend.
Right.
Because while you're pushing back, while you're trying to stop the advancement of the authoritarianism, the reality is this, that we are catching hell in our communities every day. And some of it is hell that ain't got nothing to do with the slide into authoritarianism. Some of it is just the regular hell that we just been catching, right? We got to deal with the economic challenges. We got to deal with the health challenges. We got to deal with the normal stuff. We got to deal with the police violence. That's not even the ICE police violence, but it's just the regular police violence. And so we got to defend our community, even as we're doing those other 4 Ds, even as we're developing other models, even as we're trying to cause defections, even as we're causing disruption. Because if we do that and we don't defend our folks,
come on, Cliff,
then at the end of the day, what are we fighting for?
That's right.
Right? And so I'm going to change the 4 Ds to those 5 Ds. But the good news, the other good news is this. We don't have to wait to see examples of what those 4 Ds look like in action, because guess what? Our folks have been doing it already.
Yeah, so this is a moment of opportunity. And, and as we're talking to you, it may not feel like it, right? Because we just gave this whole picture of all the things that is happening right now, all the attempts that are made to erase us, erase our power, and even our mere being. So how do you see this as a moment of opportunity? Like, that would be insane. But the good news, as he said, is our people have already started doing it.
That's right.
And we can look at recent victories. Like, even in the midst of this happening, we have had some victories that are helping to reduce harm in our community, right?
Tell 'em.
So we talk about litigation because litigation has always been a strategy that our people have used in this country. Even in front of the most conservative courts, we found victories.
You must be an
that have
attorney.
allowed. I must be an attorney because I am. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, some of those victories that have been important to reducing harm for our people right now,
That's right.
even under this regime. And so we have cases where, for example, they fired, as you talked about earlier, how many folks were fired, right? When 47, whatever he is,
Whatever he is.
first came into office.
Pedo.
Well, the good news is some courts reinstated those folks, right? And put them back to work. And that was a victory, and we got to declare and receive that victory. We also had some victories recently, from some of his executive orders, like his executive order where he tried to say, show your citizenship in order to vote. Well, a court reversed him and said that you cannot do that via an executive order. That was, indeed, a win. And, we see him doing other rogue activities, but we also know that, the courts have been giving and handing over victories. We saw the victory with the tariffs just this past week, and we also saw, some victories where the court has stopped and blocked his executive order trying to say that mail-in voting, right, is not going to be lawful in this country. And we've seen courts, step back and say no. And then we've seen the court step in even as it relates to what ICE is doing, right, and stopping some of those efforts to disappear people, off the streets. We've seen courts be radical and say and demand that people be brought back, right, and given due process. And so there have been some victories that are happening in court, and we have to receive those victories. But it's not just in court.
That's right.
We're also having election organizing,
All right.
where people are using elections right now in order to send a resistance message to what they're doing, right? This idea that the only people that should be in power in this country are white, racist men. And so what you saw last year, right, was an overwhelming amount of folks coming out in the community and voting in 2 women, right, in Virginia and New Jersey. We saw that in the state of Mississippi. Come on now.
Mississippi.
The state of Mississippi, you saw black folks electorally organizing and took away the supermajority that Republicans had in that state. And a brother and a sister did it, right? And then we saw in Georgia, something extraordinarily happened.
What'd they do?
A lot of folks didn't talk about it and not saying much about it, but there was a black woman who won a statewide office, but not just to any position. She won a position, in the Service Commission,
That's right.
which has power in our communities, a very important issue in Georgia, regulating, right, utilities.
That's right.
And so we saw 2 Democrats win. Black folks delivered that.
That's right.
But we didn't stop there
What
because
else?
all across the country, there were black women who became mayors. In the state of New York, Albany, right? In the state of Michigan, Detroit, we saw in Georgia, there were, and even in Kansas, there was a sister who won mayor. So I give those examples because it's important for us to understand that our power and our identity and our future has never been determined by the actions, the mindsets, and the maneuvering of white supremacists.
That's right.
Right? Our ancestors taught us that, and now in this moment, we are doing that.
That's right. And those local, I just want to, co-sign on, that last part about the local power,
That's
those
right.
mayors' positions. Because as we are fighting, as we are resisting,
Come on.
as we're seeing this regime try to insert itself into cities, a lot of times those mayors
Come on.
are the first ones on the front line.
Yes.
They're the ones that are determining how much the city is going to push back, whether the city is going to file suit, whether the city is going to go to the state and try to get some support from the state, right? And so having that local power is not meaningless. It means something. And so all those efforts that Sister April just shared with us are a critical part of how we're resisting by using that voting power. The other way where we're seeing, so all those things are important, right? The litigation is
That's
important.
right.
The elections are important, critically important. We're going to circle back and talk a little bit more about that. But we also have to recognize that the other ways of resisting are just as important because, again, when you're fighting against dictatorship and fascism and authoritarianism, when you're fighting against that, what our history shows, what research shows, what other countries shows, is that you can't just use the traditional mechanisms.
That's right.
You can't just use the traditional institutions. It's a part of the battle, right? The courts are a part of the battle. The voting is a part of the battle, but you've got to also use some of the non-traditional. You got to be able to use the disruption that we talked about a little bit earlier. And so as part of that, the movement work that we've seen, the resistance that we've seen in different forms, right? Because it's not always about the protesting on the front lines, but let's take, for example, the Target boycott.
That's right.
Right? Target's been getting a lot of attention recently because of the role that they've been playing in supporting the ICE actions. And so you've seen a recent wave of organizing against Target. But let's be clear, the first organizing against Target was started by black folks,
That's right.
It was started over a year ago. And what we've seen in that year, right? Shout out to Sister Tamika, shout out to Reverend Brian, right? And Sister Nina, and what we've seen, and others, and what we've seen is over the course of this year, that their stock price has gone down, almost 50%, right? And so that
was us.
That's us. Black
That's
folks
us.
did that, right? And so that's a form of disruption. That's
right.
an example of movement getting victories. What other types of movement victories have we seen? Well, we just saw in Minnesota.
Come on.
And obviously we've seen a lot of bad happening in Minnesota, right? We've seen, again, Brother Preci and Sister Good who were murdered there. And we still got to get justice for them, right? But what we also saw was one of the largest actions. Some folks say general strike. Some people don't want to call it a general strike. The largest action of absence, of folks being absent, whether from school or from work or from buying things, that we've seen in a long time, right? And so what would that look like if we were able to replicate that, not just in Minnesota, but in all of these other states as well, right? And so that's an example of movement winning and pushing back. And then I'm going to give an example that a lot of people probably don't know about, but it's really, really important. And it takes place right in the city where we are right now, right? Right in this future state
That's
where
right.
we are standing right now.
That's
Shout out
right.
to DC statehood, because right here in DC, which, you know, if you're under attack, then DC is one of the hardest places to be if you're under attack by the federal government. Why? Because the federal government has so much jurisdiction over the lives of folks in DC. And yet, in spite of that, when they were bringing the National Guard, and the National Guard is still present, right? And when they were bringing ICE and bringing all this law enforcement, the people of DC didn't shrink.
That's right.
Right, and so our friends, our partners over at Free DC, our fam over at Harriet's Wildest
That's
Dreams, right, that they organized and they got folks out. And they didn't just get folks out, but they got folks out and they used every tool that they had. They used their joy, their culture,
right.
they used a little bit of go-go, right? But they used every tool that they have to push back. And something happened a couple of weeks ago that was really important. When this regime passed the big ugly bill, doing all of the cuts that they were doing, they tried to, the DC basically, the local people and the local government of DC basically disconnected their budget from those cuts. Now, MAGA didn't like that. And so they tried to come back and undo it. And they actually wound up passing a resolution that, normally if they had done it fast enough, it might have taken away that local power that DC and that local legislation that DC has passed. But guess what? They waited too long, right? And part of it is because DC and all the DC folks who love and support the organizing in DC had gone into action.
Yes.
And so even though they passed the thing, they passed it too late. And so the law that the DC government passed, that the people wanted, that was able to protect their budget, protect their services, right? That stands.
Yes.
That's an example of movement working, right? Even though a lot of the country doesn't know about it, it's victories like that. It's small victories at
Yeah,
the
it's that
local
drip.
level. It's that drip that April talks about. Because a little steady drip, I don't want to say what happens when you got a drip of water.
If just a little drip, you don't always need a bomb,
Right.
right? Just a consistent, sustained drip of water will break concrete.
That's right. That's right. And so these are some examples of things that have already happened. But guess what? Our call tonight
That's right.
is we need more of that.
We gotta have it.
We got to have more of that, y'all. We got to have more of every type of resistance that there can be. We got to have more of the voting, right? We got to be able to these are midterm elections. And I know some people are tired of hearing about it. We say it a lot, oh, this is the most critical elections. But this election will determine whether or not this regime continues unchecked and unfettered
Come on.
and doubles down on the things that it does, or whether we're able to get control of a House or a Senate
That's
that might
right.
actually hold this regime
Right.
accountable, or at the bare minimum slows down
That's right.
the slide towards authoritarianism,
right.
even if they don't reverse it. But whether or not that happens is up to us and whether or not we come out. So this election is critical. But let's also be clear that voting, again, cannot be the only tool. It's a critically important. Look, we Black Voters Matter. We ain't going to tell you that it ain't important.
Right.
But we've got to have other forms of activism to go along with it. Because at the end of the day, and we're coming up on the 61st commemoration of Bloody Sunday.
That's right.
We'll be in Selma in a couple of weeks
Yes.
commemorating and going
Next
across.
week.
Next week.
That's
oh, my
right.
God.
It's next week.
It's coming up, y'all.
That's
and
right.
so we'll be there. But guess what? The people of Selma didn't vote for the Voting Rights
They
Act.
did not.
They had to organize for it. They had to march for it. They had to sacrifice for it. They had to push for it.
That's right.
They had to make some. They had to disrupt, and that's what this moment is calling for. That combination of using our voting power and using those tools, but also using the other tools that we have for mass resistance. And again, it doesn't mean that we have to have bodies in the street. I believe that we do. And if you can, if you're down for it, if you know how to do it and you can do it safely, we'll be there with you. But guess what? If you're not that, I need you to resist some other way.
You gotta resist.
I need you to disrupt some other way. And there's other ways that you can disrupt. You can provide support to those who are doing the disruption. That has always been a part of our movement. That's always been a part of our legacy, right? Providing support to the people that the abolitionists, so supporting those who were the ones who were more vocal, right? The Underground Railroad was a way of providing support to those who were being more active and may have been more vocal. And so there's other ways to support those who might be out front doing some resisting. But that's not all. You can use your voice. That's a part of resistance. That's a part of disrupting,
That's
right?
right.
You can't tell me that Frederick Douglass, he didn't do what John Brown was doing.
Well,
He didn't do what Sister Harriet was doing.
Right.
But he was using his voice, and that's a part of the resistance and the disruption, right? Use your voice today.
That's right.
What Roland is doing every day
is using his voice.
is using his voice, right?
Amen.
You can't tell me that Sister Ida B. Wells wasn't disrupting.
Yeah.
In fact, she was disrupting so much that they would often harass her and chase her out of a city like Memphis, right? Using your voice is a part of the resistance and the disruption. Use your voice and support those that are using their voice, like Black media,
That's right.
like the Black Star Network. And then there are other ways that you can support. You can do work slowdowns. We did this in the slave community, right? Where sometimes folks wouldn't resist necessarily by doing what Brother Nat did, right? Or by doing what Sister Harriet was doing. But it was it was that drip of slowing down the production, right? Making it so that the entire system had to slow down just a little bit. You can slow it down. You can clog it up, right? I'm thinking about the people who have been protesting at Target, right, and Home Depot, and going there and buying stuff and then doing what? Getting in line to return it. Slowing down and clogging up the mechanisms so that those systems can't operate the way that they're supposed to. I'm thinking of people that call in. And sometimes they got these ICE hotlines, right?
That's right.
Call in if you know where somebody's at. Well, everybody can call in and clog up the line,
That's
right?
right.
So that the MAGA people that are trying to use it for real can't do it. There are all types of ways for us to disrupt and to slow down and to resist
That's right.
this system. And we need all that. And the last thing I'll say on that is culture is resistance.
Yeah.
Like I just mentioned DC, and it's not just in DC. We're seeing it in all the cities. We see it in Chicago. We see it in Memphis. We saw it from Bad Bunny, right? We saw it last year from Kendrick. Our
right.
culture is resistance. Our culture has always been resistance. From the times when they tried to get rid of us playing the drums, or when we were using the spirituals that we were singing out in the plantation and thought that we was just moaning and groaning and singing, but we were really sending messages
Right.
about liberation. Our
Right.
culture has always been resistance, and it must continue to be. Don't tell me you don't have a role to play in this resistance,
That's right.
The state of our union is strong
Yes.
if we use the power that we have.
All right.
Is it me?
So, all of that could happen, right? All of that can happen, and we could slow down the slide into authoritarianism, right? Or fascism.
But it's not enough.
Right. But is that all? Right? Let's say we do all this mass resistance. We, slow down. We use our culture and our voice. We use our bodies in the streets, and we vote and we slow it down.
Right.
Do we want to go back to what was?
I got you. And so it reminds me, and we were talking about this the other day, it reminds me of a story that Dr. King told in 1968. He gives a speech to SCLC at their convention. It's called Where Do We Go From Here, right? And towards the end of the speech, he's talking about where do we go from here? And he's already talked about all these issues. He's talked about Operation Breadbasket. He's talked about power, right? Love and power. And he's talked about all this stuff. But ultimately what he gets up to is this. And he tells this story from the Bible around Jesus and Nicodemus. And Nicodemus comes to Jesus and, and Jesus is trying to tell him what he needs to do. And he doesn't tell him the little things that you need to not do. He doesn't tell him, well, to get to the kingdom of heaven, you gotta not lie. You gotta stop committing adultery. You gotta stop cheating. If he doesn't go through all the individual little things. He doesn't say you gotta stop ICE. He doesn't say that you gotta put the DEI back. He doesn't say all of these little things, because at the end of the day, it's bigger than those little things.
Exactly.
And what he says is to Nicodemus is, you must be reborn.
That's right.
That it's not enough to do each of these little things, but you've got to start over from scratch.
That's right.
And be reborn. You have got to be transformed.
That's right.
That the previous was so flawed that you have got to start over.
That's right.
And that's what he tells Nicodemus. And it very much reminds me of the message that we have for this country as we talk about the state of our union and our existence in this wider union. It must be transformed and it must be reborn.
Exactly. And so that's not inconsistent, right? This concept of being reborn is not inconsistent with what this country or the quote unquote founders of their version of America said. Because buried deep in the Declaration of Independence, right, is this phrase not often talked about, but it's there. And it essentially says that if this country or any form of government ceases, right, to do these things, the life, the liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to create a new government.
Come on.
And so we must ask ourselves as a black nation, is stopping Trump and others who want to go into this old post-Reconstruction America enough? Do we want to go back to an Obama era America? Do we want even a Biden era America or United States, right? Is that what we want? Or is it time to look at, what Cliff talked about, right? This rebirthing, this concept of a new government. Is it time for us to do that? And if it is, right, I would suggest that it is. Are we, or do we want to go to the place that our dear brother Dr. King saw? When he said he went to the mountaintop, that our people would get to the promised land. I think if we looked at and surveyed where we are right now, we would all admit that when your rights can come and go, when your liberty and when police officers can just come into your home, take you off the street and disappear you, are we at the promised land? Because we can go to stores or we just have a little bit more freedom. I'm not going to deny that we've had some victories, but are we at the place where our dear brother Marrtin saw?
Come on.
That I believe that God showed him? I dare say that we are not there. And so we've got to do something new. We've got to create a new government. So while we work to reduce harm, because those things you talked about are absolutely vital, we have got to nation build. It is nation time.
Nation time.
And so what do we want? And so what that involves is, what do we want as a nation? What do we want as a Black nation for America to be? And those are the kinds of things that we got to start acting like as Sister Tasha always talks about. We got to have a founder's mindset, not the mindset of the founders who created a nation just for white, straight men who were rich, right? And were Protestant. But what is the nation that we want for all of us, right? Even those, you know, who are the descendants of the former slaves. And so we've got to start talking about Constitution. Is the Constitution of this country, because right now they're going to be celebrating this year, right? They're going to say it's 250 years that we have this powerful Constitution in place. But has it rendered itself meaningless to us, right? Has the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment, and we know how long it took from Reconstruction for those rights to find themselves, and we know what's happening with them now, but they were never meant to be the ceiling.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So what do we want as a Black nation in a Constitution? We know right now that voting, while we talk about it, there is no listing that it's a fundamental right in this Constitution. There's a reason for that. We know right now that education is not a fundamental right in this Constitution. There's a reason for that. We know that health care, right? Your health, right? Your well-being, your agency, those things are not stated in the Constitution. It's interpreted, right? And if you got a Supreme Court that may just be a little bit benevolent, then maybe you get your rights. But those things are not stated. Don't we want a Constitution that says that, that gives us right to health care, that gives us rights to housing, that mandates that we have income, right? That we can sustain ourselves in time, that when we have disaster in our community, that there is going to be a standard, an enshrined protection to make sure that we're going to be okay. Don't we want to have education as a right? These are the kinds of things that we need to talk about. A Constitution, as you always say, right, that doesn't prioritize property over people. What does that Constitution look like? That doesn't start with Article 1 and Article 2, Article 3 of an executive branch, of a congressional, legislative branch, and a judicial branch, but it starts with the rights of the people. Go deeper than that. What if you had a Constitution that honored the earth that we live in?
Come on.
What if the Constitution started with that, right? So those are the kind of things, and we can explore whether or not we want to talk about capitalism or socialism, or we could just throw those things away. Why not have an economy based on care, right? Let's create something completely new so that our people will be sustained and provided for and protected. Those are the kind of things, y'all, that we got to start talking about. We need to reduce harm, but we have got to nation build. We've got to build a new nation, and we've got to make that just as important, right, as voting for the next person in office. We've got to have those conversations in our churches. We've got to have those conversations in our schools and community centers, in the corner, on the basketball court, on the baseball fields, on the track fields. These are also the conversations that we've got to begin to happen if we are truly going to push our movement forward and have the nation of America, or the version of it that we want.
That's right. And the deal is this. Everything that Sister Abel just talked about is possible.
Yeah.
And we have the power to get it done. But the ultimate question, the deciding question is this.
You better say it.
Do we believe? Because at the end of the day, when we believe, we have demonstrated throughout our history that when we believe a thing, we can achieve a thing, right? Somewhere it said, I know we got people listening from different faiths, right? But somewhere it said that if we only had the faith of a mustard seed, not even a mustard seed, but a grain of a mustard seed. If you had that much faith, then you could tell that mountain to move, mountain. That's what we can do if we had that level of belief. And so the
Amen.
question is, do we believe?
Do we?
Do we believe that we are a generation, that we are a people can achieve the things that Sister April just described? Do we believe that we are descendants of those who had the audacity to believe
better
after
say
they
it.
were brought here on slave ships that one day that they could run this country?
That's right.
That they could shape this
That's
country.
right.
Right? Are we going to be the ones who believe in our power so much that we are able to manifest the things that we have not yet been able to manifest? If we believe, then we can do it.
Yeah. You know, we can talk about scripture. We can talk about beliefs, and we can talk about faith. But I dare say in this moment, there's a lot of things we got to let go of.
What's that? What's that?
And one of the things is we're going to have to come up out of the Church of the Confederacy. We're going to have to come up out of these institutions that have historically, right, you know, used messages of Christ and God and Jesus to enslave us. We got to be honest about what's happening, and we've got to separate ourselves from them. And when we do that, right, when we do that, when we begin to understand that there are powers that are using our faith, our belief, in order to imprison and oppress us, then we can begin to use our faiths in a way that will move us to liberation. And so right now, right, when we think about our faith, and you know, and I know we can end on this and we want to bring Sister LaTosha in, but it's so important, you know, that we remember who we are, right, and whose we are. And I will say that, you know, I say all the time that we are neck deep people. And I say we're a neck deep people because if you are a believer, right, in the words in the story of Moses, you understand that that story is not just about the deliverance of Moses and the Hebrew Israelites to the promised land. It is also about the destruction of the enemy, right? Those two things coexisted when they had faith and chose and allowed themselves to go into a route that made them have to submerge into water, right? Our sister Harriet had to submerge herself into water even though she couldn't swim.
That's right.
In order to take our people to liberation. So we're going to have the kind of belief and neck deep faith that we just talked about here. And if we do that, there is nothing, just like our people have shown us that we have been delivered and we have come this far,
That's right.
there is no place that we cannot go.
You better say that. So we've talked, and we've talked about the state of our union.
That's right.
And while we've been talking, you know, the other dude been talking. And so in just about a minute, we're going to toss it over to our sister, our good sister friend, sister comrade, LaTosha Brown, who's going to give us a word. But while we're waiting on that,
story.
Why don't you tell us about
The wolf. So there's a story that I'm fascinated in, and it was about Yellowstone State Park, right? And in Yellowstone State Park, people may know it out there. It actually started dying, right? The whole ecosystem began to go away, and it perplexed people. It perplexed the scientists, the botanists, and so what they did was they discovered that one of the reasons why it was dying was because there was no apex predator. And so they decided to put in or to reintroduce into the ecosystem the gray wolf. And when they put the gray wolf in, within a short amount of time, the whole forest, came back to life. Yellowstone State Park became beautiful again. The beavers came back, all the waterways reinstored. But it happened because of an apex predator, because the reason why it got destroyed was because of deer.
deer?
Right? The deer, right? The deer, the friendly old light deer were the reason why Yellowstone State Park was being destroyed. So they needed an apex predator. And so, I shared this story with you because I was fascinated with the story. And, and I was making some symbolism, right? I was thinking about, who were we?
Right.
And I remember you said to me, well, sister, you got this wrong.
Because you thought we were the deer.
I thought we was the deer.
Right,
and you were like, no.
Because everybody wants to be the...
Everybody want to be the nice...
Everybody want to be Bambi.
They want to be Bambi, the nice old friendly deer.
Right.
And you said, no, sis, we the wolf. And, at first I kind of clutched my pearls because I was like, The wolf? You know, because nobody wants to be the apex predator. But then you said the apex predator, sister, right? Is important
That's right.
to bringing balance to the ecosystem.
That's right.
And so what did you say to me?
We the apex predator.
We were the wolf.
We the
right?
wolf.
And when we're not in place,
That's right.
when we are not where we're supposed to be,
That's right.
Right? The whole world is turned upside down. And so our word was be like the wolf. Get in place, Black people.
That's right.
Right?
Lean into our power.
That's right. Lean into our power.
Our
And
role.
and I am actually finna toss it to a wolf, right? I'm gonna toss it to Sister Tasha, who's a wolf.
That's right.
And gonna give us a word tonight to help us as a Black nation
To get into
place.
Get us in place, sister.
Let me tell you something. I love my brother and my sister, April and Cliff. If y'all ain't had a word, I don't even know. If y'all didn't hear the word, I think it's really important in this moment. I did listen. I'm actually out of the country, and I did listen to parts of the speech tonight. And part of what I think
Is he still?
is critical, which is part of the reason what I think what April and Cliff were saying was so relevant. Y'all, we got to pivot and we got to shift our focus. We're going to have to really be in a space that we are moving forward with the agenda that we need. I was listening. There are a couple of things. I took a couple of notes tonight, just listening to this deeply, deeply disturbing state of, as some say, state of the swamp of the union tonight. And there were a couple of things that was so problematic. One of the things that Trump is touted tonight as he talked about America getting 600,000 barrels of oil, and that Venezuela had given us 80 billion barrels of oil. I mean, essentially when it did a coup over on another country, it wasn't like that there was some kind of trade where you got it. You actually used violence and force, the very thing that you've talked about with other nations and other countries, and actually has been a justification for you to actually go into other countries. This is what you've done, and you're touting that as your victory. He also talked about that in this moment, that 100% of the jobs, that the job market is doing so well. As a Black woman, there are almost 1 million Black women who have been unemployed based on this in this last over the last year since Trump has been in office. That we are seeing rising unemployment rates, so much so that in many ways we can't even trust the numbers that are coming out. They've stopped sending numbers out so that we don't actually try raise that how this administration has a problem right now, that economically in this country that we are not doing well. That it's interesting. He said that we were stronger, that America, what's my notes? That America was bigger, better, stronger, and richer. Who is he talking about exactly? Because he certainly wasn't talking about the people of America. He's gotten richer. He's made almost $3 billion in the last, just since he's been in office. So who's bigger, who's better, who's richer? We're watching our neighbors. We're seeing pure chaos happen all around the country right now. But he didn't mention that because there's this attempt. And I'm raising these things not because I think it's important just to say, because I know many people were boycotting tonight, but I think it's really important for us to really recognize how egregious, this State of the Union is, but how egregious that the president would go there in a chamber full of people to actually say this and say this to us, that in fact that America, that, he talked about America was a dead country. Under the Biden administration, America was dead. And now is the hottest country alive. He went on and on and on. And I don't really want so much that I can say, so many notes that I took. One quote that I do want to share that he said, there's two things. And the first one, he says, large parts of the two things that I think were the two truths that he said, out of everything that he said, large parts of the world have bribery and corruption are normalized. Now, he was talking about Somalia. But the truth of the matter is, we're seeing bribery and corruption be normalized in this country, in this nation. So it's interesting that we're seeing kind of this flip of this narrative. And the second thing that he said, and I'm going to end on this, I won't even go through all the other stuff because it's really not of tremendous value just for me to repeat the lies, but I thought it was stark what he said. One of the things that he said was that America will never go back to where it was again. That is probably the strongest truth that he said. The truth of the matter is there's been so much damage and so much erosion of what we see or what we know as democratic norms in this nation that he's right. We will never go back to where we were again. But the truth of the matter is if you are a Black person in America, that we always knew that that was the floor, not the ceiling. That part of we've got to make a pivot in this moment, that we've got to create. We've got to use our imagination. I talk about it all the time. We've got to organize ourselves. We've got to fortify our communities. We've got to use our own innovation to actually dream bigger. That even when we're thinking that the attacks that are happening in our communities right now, that some of the laws that we had, including some of the programs that have been dismantled, that was the floor, not the ceiling. We've got to go to the ceiling. We've got to go higher. In this moment, we don't go back and ask for what really wasn't working in many ways. That we saw at the very best, we saw harm reduction, right? At the very best, we saw people being able to get at least some of the benefits of this in America. But the truth of the matter is, it was never enough. It was never enough. That the laws that we had, even when we're talking about the Voting Rights Act, part of the reason why we find ourselves in this moment right now, where we're looking at on the eve of the Louisiana versus Calais case, in any day now, we're seeing a case that can possibly come and that the Supreme Court, depending on how they rule, it can wipe out 19 seats of Black people who are in Congress right now, 19 African-American districts, right? And also it can impact and weaken the Voting Rights Act in such a way that when you take away Section 2, that it takes the teeth out of it, right? And that's essentially what they've been trying to do. That's essentially what Chief Roberts has been trying to do, that to actually take away the gains that we fought hard for, that we earned, that we deserve, that the very thing that actually has given and opened up and created democracy. I would say it has been the Voting Rights Act and the work of Black people and the work of folks who have been, those who have been on the front lines fighting for democracy, that ultimately that has been what has created democracy in this country. But I do want to note that was the floor, not the ceiling. So in this moment, let's take it to the roof. In this moment, we should really be thinking about what it is. We should radically reimagine what it is that we need. That we should be thinking about how do we organize ourselves, but what kind of policies that we need. We should be thinking as nation builders, as founders of a new nation, that instead of constantly responding to those that don't have the foresight, don't have the heart, don't have the intellect, right, to really be able to create a country that can support the people, create a country and a nation that all people, no matter who you are, that when we look at the Declaration of Independence, no matter who you are or where you are, where your zip code is, that your human rights are respected and valued. That is what we're in the moment. But also what we got to do, y'all, is we got to fortify. We got to fight like hell right now. We got to fight because we matter. Our children matter. Our community matters. That when we're looking at what we're up against, that we can no longer just be in what I call kind of this revolving door of change, that we will only accept or fight for the change based on white benevolence. That is not enough. I am looking at mediocrity. If we look at this administration, if we look at the people who have been in position, this is what many of us have experienced, what we witnessed, what we've been talking about, that ultimately that in this country, there has been a premium put on whiteness to the extent that you could be a mediocre white man and rise to the highest, at the highest rank of public office in this country, but our best, that when we look at Black elected officials, when we look at people who have the heart, who have the spirit to serve our folks, right? That those are the people that we really should be getting behind. And those are people who actually are supporting, who really support the kinds of things that we support. But I want to tell you all, what we have had has never been enough. that you can't be in the wealthiest country in the world and you have millions of people that are poor. You can't be in the wealthiest country in the world and the same kind of health care. If we can provide health care for wealthy senators and wealthy people in Congress, we can certainly provide health care, affordable health care to the people of this nation who actually make this nation move. It is unacceptable for us to accept anything else. And it is unacceptable for us to really believe that in this moment that we're going to take the crumbs off the table. We're done with that. We're done with that. And so, yes, I'm going to say that President Trump said one truth tonight that I heard. We ain't going back, y'all. Not only we're not going back, we're not accepting the crumbs that people are trying to give us. We're not accepting the crumbs. We're not believing the lie. We're not going back and fighting for the same thing that we've won for years and years and years and years, fighting and struggling. Yes, when we talk about, I am a native of Selma, Alabama. And so I have a special, and I'm a voting rights organizer and activist. That was never enough. We know this. Even as we're doing the work with voting, what we understand is that voting is a powerful, powerful tool. And this next election cycle, my brother Cliff said this next election cycle, we've got to shift the way that we see it. One, I think there are three ways we've got to really shift and pivot. One, we've got to see it as a vote of resistance. It has to be not just a no, it got to be a hell no, as we say in Alabama and other places, that ultimately we've got to send a message that we're not taking this line down. We're going to use every single tool available to us. We're going to use our economic power. We're going to use our political power. We're going to use our social power, our cultural capital, all the things that we have to say, no, we are not going to just take this and surrender. And we're not going to be waiting on the benevolence of white folks. That's not what we're going to do, or the benevolence of anybody, that God hasn't empowered us. And that is our agency. Even when we're talking about voting, that's not just because I think that I'm going to vote because of what the Constitution gives me. It's because of what God gives me. That as a human being, I have the right to actually be able to participate in any decision that is going to be about me and my community and my family. Secondly, I think it's really important for us as we think about this next election cycle is that we have to stop the rise of authoritarianism. For whatever people say, whatever tools is available, when somebody is coming at you and coming at your communities and trying to create a police state and trying to do all of these things, this ain't the moment for us to sit back and say and debate whether voting works or not. We know it works. Now, does it do all the things that we needed to do? Absolutely not. I'm the first to tell you it is limited in scope of the impact, but it is not truthful. We're being dishonest and disingenuous if we say that it doesn't matter, because it does matter. It does matter who the DA is. I've been in courtrooms and seen the difference between if there's a certain DA that's been put in by people and a certain that has not been, don't feel accountable to communities. I've been in places where I've seen where Congress folks have been able to get resources to rural communities and Black communities that normally would not get those resources, but they had representation. I have seen that. So we've got to really be honest in this moment. This ain't the moment for for our opinions, or just because we're seeing something on TikTok or Twitter that we saw. This is a moment for us to get real. That it is forcing all of us to be real and honest. The truth of the matter is that while voting is only one tool, and voting absolutely is not the sole tool that's going to lead us to liberation, the truth of the matter is if people are coming at our community, if we're seeing hundreds of thousands of Black workers be fired, when we're seeing all of the rollbacks of things that actually have helped protect and move our communities forward, this ain't the moment to have a debate about or to fall into this trap of it, we're going to say something clever. This is a moment for us to get real. And the truth of the matter is this next election cycle has to be a resistance vote. We've got to actually see this as a vote to say no. We have to see this as a vote to resist. We have to say this a vote that we are going to fight. It is when a bully is in the courtyard, the bully gets stronger when there's no resistance. Anytime that there's a bully and there's nothing that's challenging, people are quiet and silent, that is how the bully gets bigger and bigger. So when the bully's in the courtyard and nobody shows up and everybody's acting like things are normal, or there's some people may say, oh, you don't worry about that bully. No, when the bully is in the courtyard, those of us who have courage, right? When I think about David and Goliath, when Goliath could not go unanswered, he had to be answered. So we're going to have to take our 5 stones. And one of those stones, y'all, one of those stones is about organizing. We're going to have to organize our communities and support organizations that are on the front lines. Even this program right here, we're looking at the media. We're looking at Black voices and Black opinions being taken off mainstream national media. It is important that we're supporting our own platforms. The Roland Marrtin Show, this show right here, we're able to come to you, and Roland has been able to build this platform, this huge platform to give us voice, that we can tell the truth, that we can change the devil. And then the second thing is, I think when we're looking at the 5 stones, I think the second thing that we have to do is we actually have to fund our movements. It's important for us to support the groups that are on the front lines. The third thing we've got to do, y'all, everybody has to go. So in this moment, this is our moment. We got to fight, y'all. We've got to dream, we got to organize, and we've got to fight.
LaTosha Brown, we appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Let's quickly go to Congresswoman Sidney Camargo-Dove. She joins us right now out of California. She, of course, is always one speaking her mind. Congresswoman, glad to have you here. It's a whole lot of line going down the street at the U.S. Capitol.
Too many lies. First of all, the